Let's start with the States. And it's been feeling inevitable for some time now. It does look like Kamala Harris will be the Democratic nominee for president as she wins the support of 2,000 delegates and major figures within the party. Nancy Pelosi, for example. She also has got a lot of cash, a $230 million surge in donations. So, William, do you think, well, is she the right person to beat Trump?
Because I think it would be a disaster if Trump was elected for America and for the world. Of course, she is an unknown quantity, as everybody can see, in an actual presidential election, and has had a pretty difficult track record as a politician. Probably still hasn't got over the disastrous interviews she gave when she was as vice president, put in charge of all the problems on the Mexican border, and then it turned out months later she'd never been to the border. So she's going to have to do better than that. But I think it's just a wild card, and that is a good thing in an American election that was going to be just an election between two people who a lot of Americans didn't want that choice. This upsets the race. But she could go down to a bigger defeat than Biden, or she could win. So I hope she does well. I really wish her well, but she's going to have to be a class act this next few weeks if she's going to have a chance.
Well, should we have a listen to how she started? She's pitching herself. This was speaking, since in the last 24 hours or so. She's pitching herself really as the prosecutor against the crook.
As many of you know, before I was elected as vice president, before I was elected as United States Senator, I was the elected Attorney General, as I've mentioned, of California, and before that I was a courtroom prosecutor. In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
Kezia, just listening to that, I wonder if you think it's a compelling enough argument. It's not news to anyone that Donald Trump is a convicted criminal. I mean, is that a strong enough argument?
It's a cracking dividing line to be the person who's the prosecutor going up against a felon. It's a very neat line, and you can see that already on social media. I think the most important contribution that Kamala Harris makes to this race, and you've seen it immediately, is vitality, a sense of energy and enthusiasm, regardless of whatever background story there is there. And William's right to point to some problems around what she said in the past on immigration in terms of what that means to people who are deciding how to vote in the United States. Right now, at this point in the race, the sense of vitality, energy and money behind one sole candidate is the best possible thing that could have happened to the Democrats and indeed to the Democratic presidency prospects in November.
Is there a danger, Kezia, that she becomes the president of Twitter? In the way that Ed Miliband was the prime minister of Twitter, but not in real life, that everyone gets very excited about memes, everyone gets very excited about that type of one-upmanship over Trump, which is very legitimate, but it's fun and that people can make things out of it. But when you go to the 5 swing states that matter, it's less effective. Is that a risk, do you think?
Well, sure, it can't be the sole strategy for the next 4 months, but it's a pretty good starting place for the next couple of weeks to get that money in the tank, to rejuvenate the activist base, to get going. This completely changes this race. Now suddenly Donald Trump is the old guy who will have to account for his memory capacity and his ability to, follow the detail and rehearse the detail. It's a complete game changer in that sense. I think the mood will shift pretty quickly in the next week or so from this sense of vitality and this kind of like energy around the campaign to a serious focus on who is the best vice presidential pick, because that really matters to those 6 swing states. That's going to be a critical choice and decision. I suspect it's going to be a white man from one of those 6 states. It's a question of which white man from one of those 6 states. And that's, I think, when the campaign will really start.
And can they elect a woman, do you think? I mean, obviously the answer to that should be yes, and it's kind of strange even to ask the question, but I remember vividly the Clinton coverage and how, like, she lost for many reasons, but one of the things people have always said, Kezia, is she lost because she was a woman.
Well, there is a lot of that. Of course, there is. The misogyny that Hillary Clinton faced was astonishing. Kamala Harris faces that level of misogyny and racism combined. But it's not her first rodeo. This is where I slightly disagree with William on this. She's not a wild card candidate. She's the vice president. She has decades of political experience and many more years prior to that of working in a very public role as a prosecutor. Now, she will have a degree of a thick skin to that. It won't be the first time she's faced misogyny and racism in her life by any extent. This will be a horrible campaign. Nobody doubts that. She's going into this knowing that. This is bad for politics, the way that it's going to be conducted, of course, but the fact that she's stepping into the fray, I think is tremendous news for MD who wants to see a safer and better progressive world.
William, your fictional £5, though, at the minute, as of the 23rd of July, who would it be on?
I think we've all learned not to bet on election. But
that's why I made it fictional.
It would still be narrowly on Trump, not because I want Trump, but he's got a lot of momentum behind him, and he is at least telling a story about America. I don't think it's the right story, but he says America is in decline, and he's going to make it great again. And so for people who want to believe that, he has got a clear story. Now, the problem for Kamala Harris is, what's her story? It's quite right. This prosecutor, felon, dividing line, that's good for getting the campaign going. But is her story about the future of America going to be, it's not in decline now, the people in power are doing well? Or is it that America is in decline and she's going to do something different about it from Trump? Now, that's going to be a big decision for her, whether she's defending the Biden record entirely or whether she's got this new analysis of the future to compete with Trump. And I think she probably doesn't know that yet, and she's going to have to decide. So in my view, she is a wild card candidate. Of course, she's been a candidate before for many things, as Kezia said, but standing for president of the United States is totally, totally different from
William,
running for senator or vice president.
Which do you think is the better strategy? Because she does, in some essence, have to divorce herself from Biden and the allegations that presumably will come from the Republican Party that she didn't raise the alarm sooner, and maybe politically that would have been really challenging for her to do that, to say, look, we've got a problem here.
Well, that is the big problem for the vice president. You see, she is the incumbent, and yet she has to distinguish herself from the previous record. There's lots of things that are very good in Biden's record that she can claim credit for, but there are many deep-seated social problems in America. When you think of all the opioid addiction and the extent of cultural and political and racial division. So she is going to have to say, well, these things aren't going well in America, and this is how I'm going to put them right. If she just runs on, Joe Biden's done very well and I'll carry on with that, Trump will beat her because he has that different story about the problems of America.
We're going to move on, Kezia. In a moment, we're going to talk about this lack of faith. I just wonder, just before we move on, Kezia, is there an incumbency problem in politics? In that we're going to talk about Britain's growing increasingly tolerance of fraud and theft. And I wonder if there's a connection here, which is that a cynicism about the government means it's very hard for an incumbent to survive, because actually for the last 5 years, we've become more and more cynical. We're more and more aware of failures. We're more and more aware of division, and therefore we're always going to blame the people in power. So the old incumbency benefit may not exist anymore in politics.
I'm not wholly convinced it's about incumbency. I think it's about establishments and elites. And that takes you back to the phenomenon that is global populism. I mean, Donald Trump is a populist and somehow manages to convey himself as an anti-establishment candidate in this race, which is astonishing to many people. But populists feed on division. They frame things as about us against them, different rules applying to different groups of people in society. I think that's where the kind of fractious divides come from, rather than it just being solely about incumbency.
Last topic for us, the Tory leadership. Who are the front runners? The Conservative Party have now agreed on a timeline for electing a new leader. That means Rishi Sunak will be in power till the beginning of November. Yesterday, we asked the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride. You may be familiar with him if you listen to this programme. He was only on 17 times during the election. Is he putting himself forward?
It's something I'm considering. A number of colleagues have approached me and suggested that I might do that. We don't yet, of course, know what the actual rules of the process will be, and I'll want to wait to see that before I take a final decision. But it's certainly a possibility.
Certainly a possibility. This morning, we put the same question to the Shadow Home Secretary, James Cleverly. I think he said the same thing, but it was a little bit more indirect.
When we've been ejected from government, we do need to think why that's happened, what we need to do differently. And of course, like I suppose a lot of people in the party, I have been giving a lot of thought to that and what contribution I can make to ensure that the country remains well governed. Part of that is in my primary function, my main job now, which is Shadow Home Secretary, holding the government to account. And I will, of course, consider if there are other ways that I can contribute to society.
Other ways to contribute to society. He's running, isn't he, William, from that?
Yeah, it sounds like, of course, both of them sounded like they're intending to run, but there's this frantic thing will be going on at the moment, now that the rules have been announced, and nominations open tomorrow and close on Monday, which means really from tomorrow, those who want to stand really need to show they've got a lot of backers. So today they'll all be frantically speaking to all the people who might nominate them and making sure they can get the necessary number of signatures to be nominated. And then if they can announce early with a lot of MPs nominating them, they can even frighten some of the others out of the race. That is the game of the next 24, 48 hours.
Is the best situation for you? You'd quite like a Democrat-style coronation, wouldn't you, here, William? Because the last thing you want to do as a soaking wet Tory yourself, a moderate Tory, the last thing you want to do is to put up two candidates, one's a moderate and one's on the right, because you know where the membership will go. The membership will go the opposite way of the parliamentary party. That's how the Tories are so riven these days.
No, I think it's very important they have a real choice and that somebody really can unite the whole of conservatism. That's the thing, without being necessarily the wet, the dry, the right, the left, who can bring it all together. So I've no idea who that is going to be. And indeed, I'm going to enjoy making it really drawn out and agonizing who I'm going to support.
Oh, come on, William.
No, I'm really going to play this one for all its worth, so they all have to phone me up and ask me.
Can you promise to at least announce it on this programme when you do make your mind up?
Well, or in my Times column.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but maybe both.
Do you at least have a short list?
We're going to have months of tension before I get to that point.
Kezia, William won't say who he wants. I presume this is quite good for Labour, isn't it? Because there'll be no one covering them for 3 months. It'll be a lame duck opposition. And maybe that doesn't matter that much with their majority. Do you have any long shots, any dark horses in this, do you think?
No, but I do think it really matters, not, as you say, so much for the next 3 months, but in the context of what happens in the next 5 years. And I want the government to have a strong opposition. I think that's really good for politics. What I really don't want is a really divisive, polarised British politics. So I really hope that there isn't a leader coming through this process from the far right of the Conservative prospectus. I don't think that's good for the country. It wouldn't be good for the official opposition. And I suspect a long considered process, which is what the Conservatives have announced, will be really good for them and really good for the country.
So Kezia's saying anyone but Suella. Are you...
Basically, yeah.
William, could you go so far as anyone but Suella?
No, honestly, I'm going to stick to my complete about this.
She's got to phone him.
I gave it a go, yeah.
Suella actually wants
you're not
to...
going to get me off my stance that quickly. But Kezia is right. It's absolutely right. This is very important about the future functioning of democracy, about people having a real choice at the next general election of a credible government, of the government they've got now, or a credible alternative to that. That is what this is all about. So it is much more important than it might look.
And I was going to say, Suella Braverman actually was saying yesterday that she wants the cap on the 2-child benefit limit scrapped, confusingly.
Yeah, would you campaign with her, maybe with that on that, Kezia?
No, that's what populists do. She's jumping onto a bandwagon. That's the most pathetic contribution to this debate I've heard yet from her, and people will see that for exactly what it is.
Put you down as a maybe then. Kezia, Dugdale, William Hague, lovely stuff as ever. We absolutely love Tuesdays hearing from you. William Hague, as he says, writes a column in the Times every Tuesday. We're going to have to convince him. What's the best way of announcing who he supports? Maybe you could do it on this programme. Oh, I'll probably do it in the paper first. We'll find a way of doing it. Anyway, it's always worth reading. If you do subscribe to The Times, I know you'll always read it on a Tuesday. He's great on America, great on foreign policy as well. If you don't subscribe, then you really should be subscribing if you listen to this programme. Head to The Times website or app, look for the links to subscribe, and William Hague writes a column every Tuesday.